Hello, me and Natália are going to talk about the text, whose text is it, on the linguistic investigation of authorship. This text was written by Malcom, Couthard, and okay, I'm going to start by the beginning. The forensic linguistics first appeared like 30 years ago, more or less. It was Jan Svartvik, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. They wrote the first book that was called The Evans Statements, a Case for Forensic Linguistics. And it was when he wrote this book that we can say that the discipline was born. In the beginning, it was just an intellectual challenge that the linguistics used to do, like they just challenged themselves, but they wouldn't take the discipline that serious, the subject that serious. So it was just like in the past 20 or 30 years that the discipline started to grow and became actually a discipline with a methodology and an objective, and yeah, that's it. So the next session of the article talks about idiolect, which I think it's really interesting. So what is an idiolect? Every person has his or her own way to talk and to write, of course. And this would be an idiolect, and this can vary according to many factors, like the age of the person, the context that this person is inserting in, and of course this idiolect is going to have a variation throughout the life. Like the way I talk and I write today, it's not the same way I used to do that when I was 15, for example. And some researchers suggested that if every person has a different idiolect, it would be possible to create, to compare an idiolect to fingerprinting. Yeah, this idea is nice, but actually it wouldn't work because it is impossible, like, to create a databases like fingerprinting, because how would it be possible to create a system that would actually collect all this data? Like every person in the world has a different way of talking and of writing. How could a software or a computer program be able to collect all this data? This would be impossible. It's a very nice idea, but till nowadays people don't know how to do that. So till now it's impossible. So now Natália is going to talk a little bit about some specific cases involving forensic linguistics, and then I'm going to talk about some other ones.
So the author he's going to give 3 examples that happen in court. The first one is the case of Derek Bentley. The author says that in Britain until 1980s, the evidence presented in court was firstly taken from witnesses or accused people by handwritten form, and then typewritten to be presented in court. But the author says that it opened up space for people to alter the original statements. So in the case of Derek Bentley, this case was of 2 teenage, it happened in 1950s, and they were 2 teenage boys. They broke into a warehouse, but they were caught, and while Bentley was being arrested, his partner, his friend Craig, he shot a policeman and killed the policeman. So Bentley was accused of murder. Craig was shot at the time and died at the time that it occurred. So Bentley was accused of murder, but he already had been arrested by other policemen when Craig shot the other policeman that died. So part of the evidence that was present in court was Craig's statement of what had occurred, his dictation, but he says that the text present in court wasn't what he said in the statement, and that it had been altered. He was he was convicted and then he was hanged, but the family, they appealed, and then the author of the text, he was going to analyze it, and he says that it was possible to see that the text was forged, was made up because of the word then. He's going to analyze this specific word. So he says that it cannot be seen as an evidence, but it appears several times in the text. And he says that it is important because the word then, it gives us a time occurrence. So he says that it was atypical to appear in Bentley's statement because this time occurrence was only given mostly by police officers. So to test this hypothesis that he had, he created two small corpora. The first one was composed of 3 ordinary witnesses' statements. One was for Bentley's case and the others 2 from other cases. And the second corpora was 3 statements from policemen, 2 from basically Bentley's case, and 1 from other case. So he says that on the 3 witnesses' statements, the words then only appeared once, while in the policeman's statements it appeared 29 times. So it is an evidence that it was written, that police added information on Bentley's statement, and he also noticed that in Bentley's statement, the then was postponed. Like usually people say I then, but in his statement was Craig then, and the author says that this structure of subject before the then is mostly used by policemen. So he says that is also an evidence that it was made up because of those evidence. So the second case is the case of Ashley King. Ashley King, he was convicted of murder in 1986, and he was convicted based on his confession, only in his confession, but he retracted immediately. So the evidence that was presented in court was 10 record interviews that happened in question-answer form, but only one of the interviews actually happened simultaneously, and the others were made up. The author shows us the text, and he says that from 20 utterances that appears in the text, only the words in bold, it can look very well here, but it will be better in the slide. So the words in bold, they were taken from the original statement from Mr. King. There were the trigger notes, and he says that the other 90 interviews were mostly made up by based on the trigger notes and also in the memory of the policeman. So from this case he makes some observations. Firstly, he says that the use of inverted quotation marks makes it looks more real, because it looks like they were quoting from what Mr. King had said. Secondly, they added information, and they also changed some facts. Like, for example, in the notes they say that King called other people, but in the interview it actually says that other people called King. So it was a change on the facts that happened. There are also changes in labeling. In the notes it says didn't visit at driving, and in the interview record it says we didn't go anywhere near that old lady's house. And in fourth, he says that mostly what was made up was to make King look as bad image of Mr. King. So like in the interview record, it says in the beginning that King denies 3 times that he had killed the old lady, and then he confesses, and this was made to show that King had a bad character, let's say. And the third case he used is the case of Bridgewater 4. It's a case in which 4 men were convicted of murdering a teenage boy, based on the confession of one of them, Patrick Molloy. And Molloy, as Mr. King had done, he retracted the confession immediately, but he stated that what is there in the confession was actually his words, but he only confessed because he had been subjected to verbal and physical abuse, and also to support the confession. The police presented in court an interview that they claimed that happened before the confession, and they basically had the same information. But Molloy, he says that the interview never had taken place, and that the interview had been made up by the police officers. So the author says that someone that is not a professional would take the police words as true, but he, being a professional on forensic linguistic, he could say that both texts, one would have been plagiarized from another, or both of them plagiarized from a third one, a primary text. So he shows the extracts. This is the confession. Everything that is in bold was actually plagiarized into the interview. So a lot of what was plagiarized from a lot of what is can be seen in the confession was plagiarized to the interview. So now I'm going to pass the words to Samanta to show different cases that didn't happen in court.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about textual borrowing, or plagiarism. Like in our academic life, we hear all the time that we can borrow ideas from authors, from different texts and books, but that we have to be careful because if we not cite the author, it would be plagiarism. And throughout the academic life, we learn how to be careful and to do the right thing. But here I have an example of an author called Mr. McKay, author of Little Boss, A Life of Andrew Carnegie. He wrote about someone else. And he published this book in 1998. And after a while, a journalist discovered that he plagiarized some things from a book of Andrew. I don't have the name of the book that he plagiarized from, but I have the example. I have text A and text B here, and all these words in bold in the original texts. The text they appeared in the plagiarized text. It was not like how can I say, borrowing an idea. The author used some keywords, I would say, and made the text really similar to the original and didn't put the reference in the text. And then we have an example which I found really interesting. There is this guy Johnson. He created a computer program in 1997 which was called Vocalize, and then 1 year after this program received some improvement, and then Woos and Couthard, they called the program Copycat. This program consisted basically in put many texts together, and then the program would make a comparison of the texts and find the similarities. So after making this comparison between the text, the program would give the results of the similarities between the texts. And here it's kind of difficult to see, but we have the three examples of the three texts. Text 1, 2, and 3, and the words that are in bold were the same words used by the three students. And so we can see that there are many similar words, but they said that they just discussed the subject together. They studied together for this essay, after writing this work, but they wrote the work independently. So I guess we'll never know if they actually plagiarized from each other, or if they just had the same ideas and studied together, because it's really common, right? When we study together to write similar things. Let me see. This is not. Then we have another example, which I think is the most interesting one, about Margaret Drabble. I don't know if this is the correct way of pronouncing her last name. I'm going to call her Margaret. She was a really famous writer, and one day she decided to make a test. She wrote a book, and then she sent this book to many publishers, but she put a different name. She didn't put her own name. She signed the work as someone else. And many publishers returned the work and refused the work, even knowing, she
uses pseudonym.
Yeah, she used someone else's name. So people were accepting her work just because she was famous. But then comes the surprise. A publisher from New York called her some days after she sent the work, and she was like, "Are you kidding me? Is this some kind of joke?" Because she recognized the style of the writer. Actually, nobody asked this publisher what were the characteristics that she identified in the text. They should have asked, of course, but for this we can see that every writer has his own way to write, and probably this publisher used to read all her works, and that's why she recognized that the work was from Margaret. And I think that's it. There are some more examples, but it's basically this that is the central message about plagiarism. So guys, that's it. That was the article, and hope you enjoy it. Bye bye.